In the city of Amman, the table still carried the scent of seasoned meat when Tariq, a 76-year-old Jordanian man, pushed his plate aside. His family had insisted he eat more, and not wanting to disappoint them, he gave in. Minutes later, feeling a heaviness in his chest, he decided to lie down. Even though he remembered the old teaching attributed to Prophet Muhammad, which advised avoiding filling the stomach beyond its limit. It didn't take long for panic to begin. Tariq woke up gasping, his heartbeat erratic, his throat burning as if something were blocking his breath. His hands trembled as he tried to rise, without success. The door opened slowly, and his granddaughter's frightened voice filled the room. "Grandpa, what's happening?" He tried to answer, but no air would come. "Stay with me," because that night, caught between his body's collapse and his family's fear, Tariq would learn that the ancient advice wasn't just spiritual, it was a scientific warning modern medicine has only recently begun to understand. Before continuing, make sure you're subscribed and tell in the comments which city you're watching from. Tariq lived a peaceful life in Amman, following a routine marked by discipline and spirituality. He woke before sunrise, performed his quiet prayer, walked through the narrow streets of the neighborhood, and spent part of his afternoons reading passages from the Quran. Since losing his wife, he sought comfort in these small rituals, but also, without realizing it, sought comfort in the generous meals he prepared for himself at night. Over time, overeating after sunset became a habit. It was his way of keeping loneliness away. And whenever his daughter made a comment, he always gave the same reply: "Allah takes care of what matters. The rest my body can handle." But that night would be different. His grandson, excited to see him, prepared a dinner full of traditional dishes: fragrant rice, lamb, caramelized vegetables, dessert with honey and pistachio. The table looked beautiful, impossible to refuse. Tariq ate more than he should, trying to match the family's joy. The heaviness came quickly, first in his stomach, then in his eyelids. He had barely finished eating when he dragged himself to the bedroom, ignoring the growing discomfort. When he lay down, he assumed it was just fatigue. He had no idea that at that moment, his body was about to deliver a warning that would change everything. The house was wrapped in the typical silence of Amman's nights, when even the clocks seemed to slow their rhythm. The living room TV still cast a cold glow, painting the hallway in bluish tones that reached the half-open door of Tariq's room. He lay down slowly, believing the discomfort would fade after a few minutes of rest. He took a deep breath, trying to ease the heaviness spreading just below his ribs. But as his body relaxed, the recently ingested food began pressing against every part of his digestive system. First came the burning, a fiery line climbing his esophagus like liquid flame. Then the pressure in his chest, a strange tightness that made him place a hand over his heart, unable to understand what was happening. Saliva gathered too quickly, forcing him to swallow repeatedly, but each swallow worsened the burning. His once steady breathing began to falter in short, irregular intervals. Tariq turned on his side, trying to mimic the position in which he usually fell asleep with ease. Nothing. The sensation only intensified, as if something were pushing from the inside out. He tried to sit up. His torso rose 2 centimeters and locked. The pain seized him so violently that he let out a short groan, almost inaudible, but filled with despair. It was that sound that traveled across the floor, climbed the stairs and reached his granddaughter's room, where she was still studying before bed. She removed her headphones, frowning. The groan repeated, now weaker. "Grandpa," she called, rushing down the stairs. When she reached the hallway, she saw the blue light reflecting off Tariq's sweaty face. He was trying to breathe with his mouth open, but the air wouldn't enter. His granddaughter ran to him, touched his shoulder, and felt his body rigid, tense, as if he were fighting something invisible. That was the moment she understood. This wasn't just a passing discomfort. Something was terribly wrong, and it was happening far too fast. Tariq's chest rose and fell in short spasms, as if each attempt to inhale was being blocked by an unseen wall. He opened his mouth several times, but the air only entered halfway, pulling painful coughs from him. His granddaughter moved closer, trying to keep him alert while his face turned a worrying shade of red. "Grandpa, look at me. What are you feeling?" she pleaded, her voice shaking. His eyes watered, not from fear, but from the unstoppable burning rising without mercy. With enormous effort, he forced out broken words. "The stomach, fire, rising." She swallowed hard. She didn't know medicine, but she knew this wasn't a simple indigestion. Then a strange sound filled the room, a deep, muffled crack, as if something inside Tariq's torso had shifted violently out of place. He clutched his chest, arching his body as the sound echoed through the quiet room. It wasn't wood giving way. It wasn't a piece of furniture creaking. It was acid forcing its way up his throat, pushed by the pressure of an overfilled stomach. The sharp smell of half-digested food mixed with the air, making it clear something serious was unfolding. His granddaughter, now desperate, held his face with both hands, trying to keep him focused. "Breathe with me, get slowly, now please." But Tariq couldn't follow the rhythm. The air seemed to slip through his fingers, as if he were trying to reach something unreachable. His throat burned so intensely that even his eyes began to sting. He tried to stand up, but his body wouldn't respond. The reflux pushed him backward, stealing whatever control he still had. His granddaughter looked around, helpless, feeling her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She knew she needed to do something, but still had no idea how serious that moment truly was. What she didn't realize was that the soft crack, almost imperceptible to anyone else, marked the beginning of the worst respiratory episode of Tariq's life. And what would come next wasn't just a scare. It would be the painful revelation of an ancient warning, one he had always treated as an exaggeration. His granddaughter, trembling, dialed for an ambulance with her hand nearly slipping off the phone. The operator asked for quick information, but with each passing second, the situation seemed to slide into a darker territory. Meanwhile, Tariq fought to stay conscious. An abnormal pressure rose from his abdomen to his chest, as if something were pushing his ribs from the inside, compressing everything. His own body seemed to turn against him, in a wave of relentless discomfort. The sound of the furniture stopped. The television, though still on, seemed silent. The ceiling fan began spinning faster, making the lights vibrate in an unsettling rhythm, casting trembling shadows on the walls. But strangely, inside his own chest, there was a terrifying silence. No air flowed, no words could form. Tariq parted his lips to recite a dhikr he always whispered before sleep, hoping to find comfort, but his voice simply wouldn't obey. Not even a weak sound. Nothing. The despair in his eyes came not only from the fear of death, but from belated understanding. A phrase surfaced sharp and crystal clear, as if someone had placed it inside his mind. The Messenger of Allah warned, and I ignored it. He had always heard his teachers say that the stomach is the doorway to many illnesses, that the body speaks before the soul screams. But that night he understood it in a way he would never forget. His granddaughter, seeing he wasn't moving his lips, moved closer. "Grandpa? Grandpa? Talk to me." No answer. His pupils seemed to lose focus, as if consciousness flickered for seconds. Air stuck in his throat, blocking every attempt to breathe deeply. It was as if the connection between his lungs and his mind had been severed from within. And then the worst happened. Tariq's breathing failed completely. It wasn't a fainting spell. It wasn't a sigh. It was a momentary shutdown, a total blockage, as if his own body had decided to switch off without warning. His granddaughter heard a barely audible noise, a dry click coming from his throat. Not exactly a choke, but something between severe reflux and an internal spasm. Time seemed to stop. The wind outside went still. The ceiling fan made one slow turn and paused for a second. Even the ambulance, which should have been on its way, felt like it was taking longer than normal. In that suspended moment, between life and unconsciousness, a question hovered in the air. A mystery neither Tariq nor his granddaughter fully understood. How far can the body go when it disobeys what was meant to protect it? And before any answer could appear, the siren began to approach, but not fast enough. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Tariq arrived pale, breathing in short spasms as the nurses quickly transferred him to the emergency room. As soon as he was hooked to the monitors, the room filled with irregular beeping, revealing that something serious was happening inside his body. The first tests brought back a troubling picture: severe reflux, acid aspiration, initial lung inflammation, a sharp drop in oxygen levels. A doctor approached wearing a firm expression and speaking softly. "Did he eat a lot before lying down?" His granddaughter confirmed, feeling a knot tighten in her chest. The doctor exhaled slowly. "This is one of the most dangerous mistakes someone can make. The entire scientific field warns about it, but many ignore it." He guided her to a screen, showing the results on the monitor. He explained every detail calmly, like someone who had repeated these warnings countless times. When someone lies down right after a heavy meal, especially at his age, stomach acid can climb back into the esophagus. In certain cases, this acid travels into the lungs without the person realizing it. We call this microaspiration. He zoomed in on a digital image that highlighted small irritated areas in the lungs. Look at these spots. Small but significant. If untreated, they can progress into serious complications. His granddaughter covered her mouth, trying to contain her panic. The doctor continued. Furthermore, when the stomach is completely full, it presses against the diaphragm. This makes breathing difficult, increases the risk of sleep apnea, causes nighttime choking, and forces the heart to work harder than normal. In elderly patients, this combination can be fatal. He opened a recent report, citing modern medical conclusions. Elevated risk of apnea in people who sleep after large meals, possibility of choking due to acid reflux, direct pressure on the diaphragm, impairing lung expansion, microaspiration capable of causing silent pneumonia, changes in the sleep cycle, reducing brain oxygenation, cardiac overload in elderly individuals after excessive eating followed by rest. Each point made his granddaughter remember the oversized dinner and her grandfather's. Quick decision to lie down right after. With an unsteady voice, she asked, "Doctor, is he at risk?" The doctor stayed silent for a few seconds, choosing his words. He arrived in time. That matters. Many people don't survive an episode of reflux this strong during sleep. When acid invades the airways, the body can shut down completely. She felt tears rising. "We'll do everything we can to stabilize him," the doctor assured. "But it's essential to understand that this kind of situation isn't a simple discomfort. It's a serious health issue, and it could have been prevented." His granddaughter nodded, still in shock, watching her grandfather breathe with the help of machines. That night, between diagnoses, machines, and medical explanations, it became clear that the ancient warning about not sleeping with a full stomach wasn't superstition, tradition, or exaggeration. It was science, it was care, it was protection. And the full revelation of that teaching was still to come. The dawn advanced, and the hospital room remained dim, lit only by the steady glow of the monitors. Tariq, now more stable, breathed slowly, trying to regain clarity of thought. The near silence made every rustle of paper, every step in the hallway, every change in the machine's rhythm sound sharper. Then the door opened softly. A young nurse with a calm expression entered, holding a clipboard. He checked the indicators, adjusted the bed's incline, and observed the elderly man carefully. There was something gentle in his posture, something reminiscent of the traditional caregivers of North Africa, always patient, always steady. After a few moments, he spoke. "Did you know this kind of problem was understood long before modern medicine?" Tariq lifted his eyes, curious, still weak. The nurse pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "Many think these guidelines are recent, but they've been recorded for more than 1,000 years, he said, firm but warm. The Prophet Muhammad left clear advice about how the body works. These teachings are so precise that today science is only now confirming them. A slight shiver ran along Tariq's arms. The nurse then recited slowly, as if reading something engraved in memory. The son of Adam fills no vessel worse than his stomach. A few bites are enough to keep his back straight. If he insists, then a third for food, a third for water, and a third for air. The words floated through the room as if they carried their own weight. Tariq closed his eyes for a moment. The memory of that ancient teaching returned like a breath from the past. He had grown up hearing that advice in the madrasas of his childhood, echoed by the elders of the village where he had lived in Morocco. But with time, the habit faded, and excess took the place of moderation. "I forgot," he murmured, voice trembling. "I knew this, I always knew." The nurse smiled without judgment. "You're not the only one. People live rushed lives, eat to compensate for exhaustion, sleep to compensate for sadness, and the body, which is an amana, a sacred trust, ends up paying the price." Tariq breathed deeply, feeling both lightness and guilt. He seemed to hear again the voice of his old teacher, saying that whoever watches what enters the stomach also watches the state of the soul. The nurse concluded, "Medicine only detailed what wisdom had already taught. Sleeping with a full stomach burdens everything. Breathing, heart, liver, mind. It's like lying down with a weight on your own chest." That sentence struck Tariq deeply. He realized he wasn't facing a simple warning, but a merciful reminder. A caution that had traveled across centuries and reached him in that hospital bed on that critical night. Tears formed quietly, not from fear, but from understanding, because now he saw, with absolute clarity, that his weakened body was the direct consequence of a sacred teaching ignored out of convenience, carelessness, and longing. And in that exact moment, without any grand words, Tariq understood the true nature of his mistake and the depth of the wisdom he had tried to overlook. When he was discharged, Tariq left the hospital walking slowly, but with an awakened mind. The cold night air felt purer than before, as if every breath reminded him that life could have ended differently. He repeated to himself, almost like a silent promise, "Now it will be different." But deep changes rarely come without resistance. The next day, the house was full of familiar voices. A nephew knocking on the door with trays, a neighbor bringing hot soup, cousins saying he needed to get his appetite back to become strong again. The aroma of food filled every room. For Tariq, that had always been a sign of affection. This time, however, it felt like a more intimate test. He looked at the oversized dishes and thought of the hospital, the lack of air, his granddaughter's desperate voice calling for help. Above all, he thought of that ancient sentence, "The stomach should not be filled beyond necessity." It was a simple teaching, but now it carried the weight of a life almost lost. In the late afternoon, his daughter arrived with a steaming bowl of couscous, his favorite dish since youth. She smiled, believing she was doing something comforting. "Dad, just for today, you need to eat well." The smell was tempting, the texture familiar, the portion as generous as always. And that detail squeezed Tariq's heart. He realized his real challenge wasn't saying no to food, but saying no to the emotional habit that used food as consolation. He took a deep breath, placed his hand on his chest, and spoke gently without harshness. "Not today, my daughter. Today I honor the warning I was given." She frowned, surprised. "But you always loved it." "I still do. But liking something can't come at the cost of my health," he replied calmly. "I need to learn to stop before excess. My life depends on it now." His daughter watched him closely, recognizing the seriousness in his eyes. There was no fear, only resolve. It was as if this man, who had so often bent himself to please everyone, had finally learned to protect himself. While she stored the food in the refrigerator, Tariq prepared a small cup of mint tea and sat by the window. He watched the building lights turn on one by one, wondering how many people at that exact moment were making the same mistake he had made for years without realizing it. When it was time to sleep, he lay down slowly, feeling his body light, a sensation he had almost forgotten. No pressure in his chest, no burning, no sudden jolt when turning to the side, only calm. He closed his eyes and thought, "Now I understand what it means to care for the body as part of faith." For the first time in many years, Tariq fell asleep with the feeling that he had overcome himself. The battle had no sound, no audience, no applause, but it was the most important victory of his life. And in the deep silence of that dawn, it became clear that the true test was not surviving the night of suffocation. It was choosing, every day, to honor the warning that had been shown to him in a way both painful and merciful. The morning was bright when Tariq walked to the neighborhood mosque for the weekly community gathering. The air smelled of mint tea and freshly baked bread drifting from nearby homes, and soft conversations filled the courtyard with a gentle warmth. Many greeted him with quick hugs, asking how he was. Others simply placed a hand over their chest and smiled in respect. That day, something different hung in the air. The Imam had asked Tariq to share the experience that had nearly cost him his life. The main hall filled quickly. Young people, elders, entire families sat on the floor, attentive. Tariq's granddaughter settled in the front row, watching her grandfather with shining eyes. When the Imam called him to the center, Tariq walked slowly. It wasn't shame. It was gratitude mingled with the weight of the memory of what he had lived. He held the microphone with slight hesitation, took a deep breath and began, "I always knew overeating was harmful. I always heard the hadith about filling the stomach, but I thought it would never happen to me. Repeat a small mistake for many years, and one day it becomes dangerous." Some men nodded, others lowered their heads. It was a truth many silently recognized. Tariq continued, "I almost lost my life because I treated a teaching as if it were only advice. But it wasn't. It was protection." His granddaughter discreetly wiped away a tear. The Imam, seated beside him, took the floor next. "My brothers and sisters, look at what science says today. Severe reflux, apnea, respiratory damage, internal inflammation, heart risk. All of this happens when someone sleeps with a full stomach. Modern medicine is describing exactly what was already taught." He paused and added, "Revelation came to care for the body and the soul. The world took centuries to understand." Silence settled deeply, as if each person were mentally reliving their own nighttime excesses, heavy meals and hurried moments before bed. It was a collective moment of recognition. Then something unexpected happened. The mosque lights flickered. A power outage hit part of the neighborhood, plunging the surrounding streets into sudden darkness. The sound of doors opening echoed outside as people strained to see what was happening. But inside the mosque, nothing went dark. The generator, old, weak, almost always failing, worked perfectly. The lamps stayed on, illuminating Tariq's emotional face and the imam's steady gaze. It seemed impossible, considering the generator was known for breaking down at the worst moments. The imam looked up at the steady glow above them and smiled with warm serenity. Allah reminds those who need to be reminded. Soft murmurs spread through the room, not of fear, but of reverent awe. It felt as though the moment had been wrapped in a silent confirmation, an invitation for everyone to take the teaching seriously. Tariq felt his chest warm. It wasn't the weight of food, it wasn't pain, it was understanding. He looked around, saw attentive faces, some emotional, and realized that his experience wasn't his alone. It was a collective warning. The blackout outside continued, but the mosque remained bright, illuminated, welcoming, as if serving as a reminder that light always reaches those who choose to change. And in that instant, Tariq knew that the scare that almost took him away had become guidance for everyone around him. In the days following the gathering at the mosque, Tariq's story began to spread through the neighborhood like a spark meeting dry straw. First, it was the mosque regulars who repeated it among themselves, recounting the elders' words and the imam's comments in detail, as if making sure nothing was lost. Then families shared it with neighbors, aunts, distant cousins. In just a few days, it seemed the entire community knew a man had nearly lost his life for ignoring an ancient teaching that now made more sense than ever. Tariq noticed it when walking through the local market. The date seller, a young man always in a hurry, recognized him and said, "Mr. Tariq, last night I ate half of what I usually eat. I felt lighter this morning." An elderly woman leaning on a cane approached next. "My son told me what you went through. I decided to stop filling my plate before bed. I felt aches for so long that I blamed on age. Maybe it was just excess." The impact didn't stay with the older people. In the school courtyard, teenagers repeated with shy laughter, "1/3 food, 1/3 water, 1/3 air." It became almost a mantra. Something that once felt like a memorized line from religion classes now carried physical, real, visible meaning. In just a few days, dinners became lighter. Entire families began eating earlier, discussing medical studies that confirmed what the Prophet had already taught. The body asks for balance, not excess. Conversations in bakeries and cafes revolved around apnea, reflux, sleep quality, metabolism, topics previously rare among the community. The change, however, spread beyond homes. Local doctors, after hearing the story, began using it as an example in consultations. One general practitioner, known for his blunt honesty, told his patients, "Did you know a man almost lost his life because he lay down right after a heavy dinner? The body works harder at night. It's like asking the heart to keep running after a full day of exertion." And he always concluded, "What's most impressive is that this warning has existed for more than 1,000 years." Pharmacies also noticed something unusual. Sales of heartburn and reflux medication dropped slightly that week. The owner of one pharmacy commented to Tariq as he walked in to buy calming teas. "Funny, people started asking about digestion, meal times, the proper way to sleep. I think your scare started a movement." Even the trendiest cafes in the neighborhood, often filled with university students, decided to organize a small talk about nighttime well-being, inviting a doctor and a theology student to explain how the two fields connected. But perhaps the most striking change happened inside Tariq's own home. His children and grandchildren, once so accustomed to serving enormous portions at meals, began cooking more carefully. His daughter, who used to say, "Father, eating a lot is a sign of abundance," now repeated, "Father, eating with balance is a sign of wisdom." And on a quiet evening, his youngest grandson sat beside him, holding the same Quran Tariq used to read before sleeping. "Grandpa, now I understand why you always said not to ignore warnings." Tariq smiled, running his hand through the boy's hair. "Some warnings come as words, others come as a scare. What matters is not needing the scare to learn." The episode that nearly ended his life had now become a guide for many others. With every new meal, each family in the neighborhood silently remembered, overeating may feel like pleasure, but it is often a disguised trap. And so the fright of a single man spread like light, changing habits, correcting misunderstandings, and revealing that faith and science had never walked separately. The following weeks transformed Tariq's life in ways he would never have imagined. After the episode that nearly stole his breath, nighttime became more than simply the end of the day. It became sacred ground, a space of discipline, calm, and reverence for his own body. He understood that every choice made after sunset had the power to preserve or harm his health, and he decided he would never again enter the darkness with a stomach weighed down by excess. That was how his new nighttime routine was born. When the sun in Rabat disappeared behind the rooftops, Tariq warmed a small pot of mint tea. 2 dates were placed carefully on a saucer, like a silent vow of moderation. Then he walked slowly through the narrow courtyard, where old plants still carried the fragrance of his late wife. The cool air touched his face, and each step seemed to dissolve any lingering tension. In those first days, the difference in his mood was noticeable. He slept earlier and woke up energized. His chest, once heavy during the night, now remained light. Even the family doctor commented during a routine visit, "Tariq, your breathing is more stable. Are you doing something different?" He replied simply, "Yes, I'm eating less, much less." The news spread through the house. His daughter, used to preparing generous dinners, found herself having to change old habits. In the first week, she brought a large dish of couscous to the table and asked, "Father, won't you eat a little more? The food is still warm." Tariq took a deep breath, placed his hand over his chest, and replied, "My dear, if I give in today, I forget what I learned yesterday." His daughter remained silent for a few seconds. A lesson coming from her father had weight, and she knew it. Slowly, she began preparing smaller portions, not only for him, but for herself as well. She felt lighter, calmer, more aware. The grandchildren noticed the change too. Before, they asked for treats late at night. Now they understood the house had a new rhythm. One of the children, curious, asked, "Grandpa, why don't you eat dinner anymore?" He bent down to her height and said, "Because the body needs rest, and if I put too much weight on it, it gets tired before I do." The answer made the little girl smile, even if she didn't fully understand. But that didn't matter. She was already absorbing the lesson without realizing it. With time, neighbors started noticing that Tariq seemed more energetic. Some saw him walking at sunset and stopped just to compliment him. "Tariq, you look younger," he replied with humor. "Not at all. I just stopped fighting against my own body." Other neighbors came seeking advice. One of them, a man around his age, complained one day, "I sleep poorly every night. Do you think it's my age?" Tariq smiled and answered, "It's the excess. Age just takes the blame." Conversations began spreading through the neighborhood, and without realizing it, Tariq became a reference for balance. Some residents adjusted their meal times, others adopted light teas. The community seemed to align itself with a healthier pattern, even though no one had planned it. One afternoon, the imam of the local mosque heard comments about the changes Tariq had made. After a prayer, he approached him and said, "I heard your new routine has inspired half the neighborhood." Tariq, embarrassed, replied, "I did nothing extraordinary. I just obeyed an old teaching I ignored for years." The imam smiled. Sometimes what transforms us is exactly what seems simple. And indeed, Tariq felt that simplicity filling him from within. He no longer slept in fear. He no longer woke up suffocating. The severe scare had become renewed strength. Even his posture had changed. He walked with more steadiness, sat with more comfort, and above all breathed with gratitude. At night, as the neighborhood grew quiet, he reflected on how a single forgotten warning had returned to save him. The body doesn't shout at first, it whispers. For years he ignored those whispers. Now he listened to each one with almost devotional attention. And so his home, his family, and even his street witnessed that deep transformations don't need to be born from great events. Sometimes all it takes is a scare, and the wisdom that was already there, asleep, finally finds space to awaken. That night, while the house rested in silence, Tariq pulled his armchair closer to the window. The soft wind moved through the curtains, carrying the distant scent of the sea. The sky above Rabat turned shades of orange and gold, and the peace he felt seemed to follow each shift in the horizon's colors. He rested his hands on his knees, breathed slowly, and let his mind revisit everything that had happened. The scare, the fight for air, the crushing weight on his chest, and then the clarity. A clarity that didn't come from the doctors or scientific explanations, but from something older, deeper, more merciful. Allah does not warn to restrict us. He warns to protect us, he murmured unhurriedly. The words resonated inside him like a soft reminder. For the first time in many years, he felt that body and faith were walking in the same rhythm, not as two separate forces, but as inseparable parts of who he was. His granddaughter entered quietly and asked, "Grandpa, are you okay?" He smiled, a gentle, grateful smile. "Yes, today I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was comforting. It was the kind of silence that only exists when the heart has finally found rest. On the horizon, the first stars appeared, marking the arrival of the night. Tariq closed his eyes for a moment, taking it in, and felt a simple yet powerful certainty. Caring for the body is also an act of worship. And with that luminous truth inside his chest, he let peace fill his entire being. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video. Because the body is an amana, and wisdom always arrives before science is ready to explain it.